Hey, welcome back to Stories of Dave. Today we're reading part 1 of chapter 14 of Hokey Pokey. Just a closer float with thee. Don't forget, folks, you can read along with your own copy of Hokey Pokey that you can obtain through a link in the description. It's got hillbillies, crystal meth, luncheons. It's got a little bit of everything. Get yours today. Chapter 14, part 1. Just a closer float with thee. Residents of Red Boiling Springs would say in later years that it was the greatest tent revival ever held in that particular bend in the hollow, and the best attended too, even if it was the first and only one. Old-timers were seen casting off their crutches and hearing aids a whole week in advance. Such was the sudden and prevalent presence of the spirit that moved among the hearts of the locals as they watched the trucks come in, the men setting the poles for the big canvas tent that they planned to spread above a piece of that fallow bottommost 20 acres or so of the Nelson family's tobacco farm. Some said you could smell the unmistakable bouquet of roses in bloom, and that even the tranquility of the sunsets changed, growing more and more purple in hue as the day of the revival approached. A quiet, festal anticipation had settled on the faces of the neighbors as they watched the tent get raised and watched even more trucks, drawing flatbeds covered in Don's Johns and trailers of materials for building temporary concession booths and food stands. Had one of those trucks pulled a Ferris wheel out to the Nelson farm that week, or if they had set up a tilt-a-whirl ride, it would have seemed to make perfect sense. Such was the mood in the days leading up to the great tent revival. Red Boiling Springs. There was a cotton candy booth off to one side of the big orange and white marquee tent, and a long line of fold tables set up real nice, with orange and white checkered crepe paper tablecloths held down at the corners of fishing tackle. Behind those, dough-faced men in baseball caps and coveralls labored over handmade smokers so big and hot they had to be welded to the trailers that bore them. Others turned whole hogs over pits full of white-hot hickory, and the smoke drifted with the lightning bugs up into the summer canopies of oak and tulip poplar like frankincense rising from evening vespers in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Ladies in pastel bonnets and floral print sunfrocks came from as far as a day's journey away bearing casseroles and pies and precious little bits of this and that, while their own personal precious little bits of this and that ran amok in the meadows and in the young tobacco rows, groping one another on accident. Who knew what strange new entries would have to be inked into the family tree next year? Playing little games of tag, gotcha last. Inside the tent, they had arranged 20 rows of folding chairs with 40 chairs per row, per Reverend Judge Goolsby's request. It's biblical, he'd explained. They had two big oscillating fans situated in the front, plugged into an outlet that ran to a generator via long orange utility cord. The tent measured almost exactly 1 semed in circumference, per Reverend Judge Goolsby's other exact request. Semed was a Hebrew word that had come via the Lord himself in a dream the Reverend Judge had napping down by the creek. He didn't say which creek, but anyone in church who knew about his comings and goings in the vicinity of Martin's Creek had to avoid making eye contact during that part of the message to keep from laughing out loud. Nobody was doing much napping down Martin's Creek, much less Reverend Judge Goolsby, whose responsibility it had been to figure out the math necessary to fit a semed into a circular tent shape with a little left over. At the front of the tent, they had erected a small stage with enough room for a preacher, an organist, 3 song leaders, and a bank of amplifiers to amplify the speakers and the music, with a little room left over at the front of the stage for a supplicant to kneel and receive the healing touch of Jesus, or to stand and give witness. On the program right below it said the message, which had been misspelled massage, to the right of where it said the healing touch of Jesus. It said TBA. They expected a full tent, just from the list of names they knew would attend. Folks from First Mission, and even some folks from the Free Will Baptist Church and the First Baptist Church proper, and from other churches a day's journey away. There was even a contingent of Episcopalians and Catholics in attendance, though they kept mostly to themselves in an area of the pasture they'd staked out close to the cotton candy booth and the buffet tables. There was ample parking. The musicians in the choir sat behind the stage, and they warmed up the crowd in the afternoon of the first day of the revival with renditions of old country gospel favorites. They played Amazing Grace, the ballad of Arliss Richards, May the Circle Be Unbroken, Thing Called Jesus, and Just a Closer Walk with Thee. As the little band played, members of the flock filtered in and took seats under the shade of the big orange and white marquee tent to await the gospel reading, and after that, the massage, and then the witnessing and healing of the sick. Those who knew the words sang along. By the time the service started on the first night, there were already well over 1,000 people in attendance, and the Nelsons had to order a dozen extra Don Johns just to handle all that extra sweet tea and squirt. Even some of the local migrant workers and chicken pullers from the Purdue plant came for the revival. Children in plastic shoes with handmade zip guns and styrofoam nunchucks clung to homemade bicycles cobbled together from scavenged parts, or peered out from behind their parents' legs like mute, coal-dusted urchins with Kool-Aid rings for smiles. Hola, Candace said. She stood at the head of the informal receiving line at the top of the food table. She spoke slowly, exuberantly, as if to a room full of children attending a special needs school. Welcome to America, and buenos dias to y'all. She and her colleagues managed the flow of humanity and directed the consumption of food, replenishing the trays of meat and refilling paper plates, plastic cutlery whenever necessary, and making suggestions. Oh, you must try some of Judy Lou's pigs in a blanket. We just couldn't make enough of those at the country fair last year. They're to die for. Have you had any Irma's Super Bowl dip? Everything besides the pork and the watermelon was a dip, or something wrapped in a blanket, or a casserole of some sort. But someone had apparently walked along the buffet, smothering every available dish in a deep, cheesy layer of scalloped potatoes. Where there were no potatoes and dairy cheese product or macaroni, there was plenty of bread, stacks of loaves of Wonder Bread, and a half a semi-truck's worth of biscuits and rolls for the pulled pork, which came up from the line in steaming heaps to keep the chafing tins at the state of equilibrium, and chips and potato salad and vats of baked beans with added brown sugar and onions and bell peppers. Besides those peppers, the only vegetables available were breaded and deep fried or slathered in Campbell's cream and mushroom soup. There were more than a half dozen different varieties of green bean casserole displayed on chafing platters, and still other platters with mashed potatoes, potatoes au gratin, potatoes with broccoli and cheese. All the main food groups were covered: high fructose caffeine, meat, cheese product, bleached flour product, and just enough vegetables to give everything some color. Candy and her cohort moved up and down the length of the tables, their hands flapping out now and then, fan away the flies. Thanks for joining me for part 1 of chapter 14.